All right, the prosecution has rested its case against the man charged in the death of Chris Kyle and Chad Littlefield. Today, the prosecutor showed video of suspect Eddie Ray Routh in the back of a patrol car just minutes after his arrest. Routh is accused of killing Chris Kyle and Chad at a gun range in 2013. Prosecutors yesterday played a video of his confession to the jury where he said, quote, "I'd tell them I'm sorry for what I've done. If I could have done it differently, I would have done it differently." Well, let's bring in some analysis on that from some actual lawyers. RJManuelian is a criminal defense attorney, and Peter Odom, also a criminal defense attorney, because those guys make a lot more money. He also joins us. He is also a former prosecutor. So, Peter, I'm going to go to you first. It seems like the prosecution here has a bit of a slam dunk, and maybe it's always that way in the middle of a trial when only one side has presented their case. But I'm watching this. I'm looking at the confession video. He admits that he knows right from wrong. He admits he's sorry for what he's done. He tells the arresting officer that, as well as his sister. How can you possibly remedy that in defense?
Well, I'm with you in terms of a slam dunk. I mean, let me put it in perspective. Think of this as trial as a tragedy in two acts, right? Because every insanity case, there are two major issues. Act one, the jury's going to have to decide whether he committed these murders, whether he killed these two men out on that firing range. We know how that's going to go. There's a confession. There's plenty of physical evidence, right? Act two, the jury then has to decide, and the defense gets a chance to prove that Routh was insane at the time that he did this. Insane in Texas, that means didn't know right from wrong. So the jury's just heard in his own words that he knew that what he did was wrong. So, you know, I'm predicting right here on your show that they're going to find him guilty of the murders, and the jury's going to reject his insanity defense. Yeah,
because the insanity defense is interesting, and RJ, feel free to jump in here. I want to talk about the mental illness aspect because, you know, clearly the guy was troubled. He had PTSD, but now there are stories coming up that he lied about some of the stuff that he saw in combat in Iraq and when he was in Haiti on that peacekeeping mission, and he was doing so just to get some extra benefits for PTSD. Clearly a troubled guy. But how do you make the move to full-blown insanity? Because there seems to be a bit of a gulf there.
Well, I've handled insanity defenses
I want to bring in RJ for just a second, Peter.
Okay.
Sorry, Peter. I've handled insanity defenses before, and I'm going to respectfully disagree with Peter. It's not the insanity at the time he's being interviewed and confessing. It's the insanity at the time he shoots Chad Littlefield and Chris Kyle. Because in insanity cases, it's very possible that his logic or he came to fruition after the fact. But that's not what's key and that's not what's relevant. The jury's going to look at, through the forensic psychiatrist's testimony, what was going in his mind at the time of shooting Chris Kyle and Chad Littlefield. The fact that he confessed later, I would argue to the jury, has no relevance and no significance because you go to the state of the mind at the time of the killing, not at the time of the confession.
I mean, that might be the kind of effective. Go ahead, Peter. How does that fall apart?
Here's the issue. Even if he were mentally ill, and they might prove that he was mentally ill, but under Texas law, he's not insane. Remember, insanity is not a moral concept. It's not a clinical diagnosis. It's a legal concept that varies from state to state. In Texas, it's exceedingly narrow. If he knew right from wrong, then the insanity defense cannot apply. Now, the last piece of evidence that the prosecution presented to the jury was his confession where he said he knew that what he did was wrong. And RJ, with all due respect to you, how does the defense get around that under Texas law?
Well, because, Peter, you're mentioning that he confessed at the time of speaking to the police. The deed was already done. You have to go back and play the movie frame at the point that he took his gun and he shot Chad Littlefield and he shot Chris Kyle. That's when the movie stops, not at the time of the confession.
But, RJ, you know, I think when you're dealing with reasonable people, they have a pretty good gut feeling for what it means to be insane. And insanity is not something you just snap out of. Like, you know, one moment you're insane, and then one moment you're well enough to say that you feel bad about what you've done. The other thing, and I brought this up with you the other night, which is going to be problematic for the defense, is you're in Texas with a lot of people who have served in the military, a lot of families who have military family members who have PTSD, and they know that PTSD is not an excuse for murder.
Well, here's another thing. Let's not talk about the white elephant in the room. If he was high, insanity doesn't apply. What do I mean by that? The evidence is that he was drinking copious amounts of whiskey and smoking the evil weed before he ever went out on that firing range. In criminal law, RJ, you know this, we call that voluntary intoxication. The law is clear. The law is simple. If there's voluntary intoxication, then insanity cannot apply.
Okay, RJ, last word. You have 10 seconds.
I was going to ask Peter, why is the weed evil? But I agree with Peter. If you voluntarily intoxicate yourself, you don't have a defense. But I don't think that's the situation here. I think he had post-traumatic stress, as many vets do. And I think because of the fact that he knew Chris Kyle was there to help him. These were friends. There's no mens rea. No mens rea, no crime, not guilty.
I say that every time I go to the drugstore when I have my monthly bill. You guys, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Very good. Thank you both.